He has so many meetings and things that he couldn't get here.
Okay.
Good evening. Am I on? Hello? 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 They're not responding. Jeff, I need your help. They're not responding. Good evening. That's better. Mr. Manning, the course coordinator, is absent this evening, but he asked that we introduce our guest speakers. We are now in session 3 of Hoosier Homesteaders, and I am very proud to present Rowena Shaw and her son Ryan, who is a former student of mine, and we welcome them this evening, and we are very anxious to hear about their family homestead farm. The Shaws.
Are they supposed to sign?
Yeah, don't forget to sign in up there.
Don't forget to sign in. Well, let's turn on the plat map, the first thing. I first want to show you where our farm is.
It's coming.
Let's see, when was the original papers that we got?
1865.
In 1865 is when my grandfather purchased part of it, and right now it's up here in my oldest son's name because they're part owners in it too, my children. So when they put these up, they're all put David's name first because he was the oldest. If you can see where it is. There. Okay, we have about 287 acres in there. I'm going to show you some pictures along the way then too. This is one of my grandmother when she was a young lady. I think that was probably when she was maybe married or about that age. And then we have a picture here of my grandmother and dad, that's my father, in front of the house that Mrs. Reisner used to live in down on Northwestern Street. It's torn down now.
Oh, I forgot that.
How come you keep getting involved in this?
Yeah. And this is a picture of my dad and my mother and my older kids, 3 older kids there. I'm sure some of you probably recognize my mom and dad. There, yeah. Okay. Now then, go to the house. The original house was, let's see, what is it? Just the V-shaped part of this in the middle there it's the original house. My grandmother was scared to death of fire. So she had a door in the front here where we have the picture window. And she had an outside door. She had an outside door on the left of that house, a room. There was a door, outside door on the south side of that room. And then there was a door that was off of the pantry that you could go outside. So whenever anybody said fire, she wanted to be sure her kids all got out. There was also a door upstairs in that middle window that had over a porch. There was a porch there, and they could get out the door in case of a fire. They had, 4 stoves in the house, and there was 2 chimneys. The one chimney went up through the living room and clear up into the second floor. So they had a wood stove on the second floor and one on each side of the wall in the living room. So there were 2 stoves in the living room. And I think that one end of the living room probably was originally the kitchen. Then when the other end was added on. See where the roof goes out that way. No, the far roof, yeah.
Yeah, right there.
And on that one, they had a north door out, and they built a woodshed attached to the house. Now that was something in those days, to have a woodshed attached to the house. But it had 2 doors in it too. And the end of it was open so they could throw the wood in as they brought it in from the woods, chopped up. So then later on, they added a bathroom. That was even after Bud Jenkins, I believe, moved in.
Was in this wing here.
Yeah, it's in that wing there. And then we added some more and made another big bedroom there. So there's 4 bedrooms upstairs and 3 bedrooms down in that house. Then later we decided we wanted an attached garage and we needed a shed. So we put this Farm Builders building on the side there. So we've got a shed, work shed right beside our living room. A big yard that I still keep mowed all the time. So then this one was a picture of my mother when she was a little girl. This one down here is my mother. This was my Aunt Nettie Jordan. I don't know whether I remember her or not. And Uncle Orvis,
Is that him right
the
there?
minister. And this was their younger sister now. And that was before any of the other kids were come along. Okay. Now, let's see, we'll go ahead and show this picture of the house then too. That's a closer up picture of the house. You can see where the shed is. You know, you can't tell. And this last, you can't tell that other bedroom on there. This little window here is was Ryan's room.
They don't need to know that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Come in and give me some right now.
So let's see. Okay, we should have this one too. This was a picture that was in the Republican the other night. The taller one in the back is Jim Hoover's dad.
Looks like a Hoover kid there.
And the next one was my father. And his nose looks bandaged up. And if any of you knew him, he had been kicked in the face with a horse as a kid. He never told me how old he was. He said, oh, he was a kid. But here in his senior picture, it looks like he was still a kid at 18. And when I was 18, I didn't think I was a kid anymore. So anyway, I was surprised that he admitted that that happened when he was a kid. Okay, we'll go on. Well, I've got to put this picture in since Bob Jacks is here. Where is Bob?
Over there somewhere.
Yeah, okay, yeah. You recognize that, Bob?
I'm not hearing it, Rowena.
Oh. Isn't this you?
I think it is.
That was our 7th and 8th grade class out at South Marion. There are a few of those people that are still around, but not very many.
There's Mom right
Yeah, Mom's right there. Okay. I guess, okay, as we go on about the farm, and telling about the farm, okay, go ahead. This is a lease. Bud Jenkins' father moved in on the farm. Let's see, what was the date on that one?
1908.
In 1908. And Bud lived there until he went into service after he was married. And I found a document that my dad, where they released the farm, and he had written on there 35 years. They farmed this farm for 35 years. So anyway, he divides the corn, and it was 218 acres. Turn it on over. That's the part. And he had to pay $100 or $50.
$100 for the pasture and hog lot.
Yeah. And 2 different payments. And after Jenkinses moved out, there was a family by the name of Hiram Peters that rented the farm, and he still charged $100 for the pasture ground on there. Okay. Now then, my dad's father died when he was 53, and his other brothers and sisters all left town, left the country. They moved to Seattle, Washington. So my grandmother didn't think that she could handle the farm. So she and my dad moved into this little house in town. And then I think they must have moved in there after Dad got out of the 8th grade. He never told me what grade school he went to, but there was a grade school on the back road over on Bob Jacks's farm that Bob Jacks owns. And then there was a school, I believe, in McCoysburg. And there was one over in Pleasant Ridge, on the corner there of Pleasant Ridge. So whether he walked to those schools or not, I really don't know. He never told me which school he went to. But he did, when he went into town then, went to high school, which was unusual because at that time very few of them went on to school. But before they moved, his father apparently had rheumatism or something. He went to Hot Springs, Arkansas every year in the wintertime. And when he would come home on the train, and the train would stop on the road just north of Potts's house, there at that corner, and my grandfather would get off and would walk to our farm then, which was about 1.5 miles. The older boys would see him coming with a suitcase and would run and greet him. So he wasn't around very often to help out on the farm, apparently. So there were 4 boys and 3 girls in the family. Let's see, this tells about the house. Oh, going back to the house again, the farmhouse. The stair steps are very, very steep and narrow. I don't know whether anybody's been in an old house or not, but they really have steep, narrow steps. We're really fancy because they had a basement. Now the floor wasn't poured with cement for years. I don't think it was poured until after Jenkinses moved out. But it was, where's that picture of the rocks? The walls are made of huge rocks and mortared together and still holding that old house up from all these years.
I don't have it.
You don't have it? Okay. Okay, in the kitchen of the house, where the picture window is, there was 2 windows, and there was a pantry at each window. One of the pantries had a big bin in it that held 100 pounds of flour, and the other one held 100 pounds of sugar. So they didn't go very often to get groceries in town, go in town. However, there was a store at McCoysburg at that time. And when I talked to Bud last night, he said he thought McCoysburg was really going to be a big metropolis because they had a grocery store and a post office and where's that card from the post office, McCoysburg Post Office? I have a card that was sent, a birthday card, and it was stamped, mailed from McCoysburg. So you see, they also had that big white house across the railroad track. Has anybody been to McCoysburg? A few. There was a big house across the railroad track, and I guess once in a while people used that for a hotel. They'd stay there all night. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, Sandy knows all about McCoysburg. Yeah, so anyway, we go on from there. The wooden shed was attached to the house. Okay, what did the people do way back then for entertainment? I mean, here they were home and only had horses. Of course, they played games and things with the neighbors and could ride their horses around. But somehow or other, my dad had learned something about parachute jumping, of all things. So as a kid, he got his mom's umbrella and went off the side of the barn, the roof of the barn. But he didn't break anything. He rode horses a lot. In the wintertime, they liked to play checkers and chess and dominoes. They did a lot of reading. Let's see, of course they had no radios. Then communicating between all the different people around. When there was a death in the family, they sent something like this not by mail, because there's no stamp or no address or anything on these envelopes. But this was a notice of a death in 1879. And here's another one. 1869. So the funerals were always in the homes, apparently.
What computer program did they use to write that?
I don't know.
They
Guess they
didn't
must
have
have.
one back.
No,
Wrote by
but
hand. Handwritten.
that isn't handwritten, I'm sure.
Printed.
Okay. Well, those were unusual things we found. I don't know whether the church at McCoysburg was there at that time. I didn't get information on that as to whether they went to McCoysburg Church or not, or where they went. My grandmother was a Presbyterian, but I know she went in after they moved into town in this little house on Northwestern Street and joined church. And when we're talking about the Monon Railroad, when Dad did go to college, he rode the Monon down to Bloomington. He went to Bloomington for 2 years. And my mother also rode got a train up at Newland or Gifford or somewhere up there, and went to Valpo to get her teaching degree. My dad taught for 30-some years, and my mother taught for 30 years. So my mother stayed at people's homes most of the time. Wherever she taught all over the county, I believe, and stayed at people's homes, while Dad would ride his bike. He had a two-wheeler, and he taught out at Pleasant Ridge, and rode his bike back and forth for a long time, and then stayed out at a house where the Talbot Trailer Company is now, with a Parkinson family. So, but even after my grandmother and Dad moved into town, grandmother had sheep, and she would rent the sheep out to families that had big yards that were fenced in that couldn't keep them mowed. And the sheep would keep the yards mowed, and they'd have them for a couple of weeks, and then they'd transfer them over somewhere else. to somebody else's yard. So she always had a little income coming in the summertime anyhow. Then Dad did teach at the old South Marion School, and he was the coach. He was the principal part of the time, and he also drove the school bus. So he was a busy guy out in there. But the class size was quite small. I have seen in the book that Mr. Huntington published that the class sizes were pretty small out there for a long time. Okay. See, of course, we had, for the funerals, we did have the Milroy Cemetery close by and the Crockett Cemetery close by. And then some people put their families on their own farms. Now, there is a little cemetery next to us on Chubb Myers's farm. We don't have any idea who is buried there, but there's tombstones and it's fenced, so they stay out and don't bother that. What they raised on the farm back then, no soybeans. We had oats, and we always put the straw in the barn. Our barn was pretty good size, and we had a thing that would, a pulley that we could pull it up, and where's the picture, thrashing picture?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, that's over on the 80. That isn't the,
So no, that's where you live though, isn't it?
yeah, that's,
It's still part of the farm.
yeah. Well, they had that too then. This, my dad later bought an 80 acres just south of the main farm. And you see this big barn with a high roof. And they bring the hay up on the wagons. I just had those. There it is. And that's a threshing. Here it is threshing. Can you get that any clearer? And we always had to haul water. The haystack is over here. The hay is blowing the straw out there. And it was the women's place to see to it that there was plenty of water delivered. And so we were always taking jugs of water down to the thrashers. Then they when they got enough hay out, or they put the hay out after they got the barn filled. But they couldn't shoot the hay up into the barn. I never saw them do that. I wondered why they didn't later on, but they hauled it up on wagons and then stuck the fork down in and it slid up and they pulled it in and tripped it. And was that fun to play in those hay mows when that was full of hay and ride on that rope across. And my grandmother Jordan had a big barn, and it had a longer swing, and it was really fun. Okay, let's see. Teaching, transportation, about the house. Okay, let's go to the turkeys. Now, we didn't move out to the farm until the Depression hit in about 39. No, let's see, it was before that we moved out. Yeah, okay. There's some more of our turkeys about harvest time. We raised, the banks all closed then, and so we decided we'd move out of this big house that I live in now and rent it out and move into this little old house on the farm and raise turkeys. So we started out with 150 turkeys the first year. And apparently we made it because we still have everything. It pulled us through the Depression, I guess. So that was, yeah, and that picture there, yeah, okay. Oh, here's the picture of the card from McCoysburg. That was postmarked from McCoysburg. There's the front. Oh.
Hang on, it's coming.
Isn't that a fancy one for that far back? And then on the back is, you barely can see McCoysburg up there.
You try to get that off, it won't come off.
Um, let's see. Okay, when Bud lived there, he was going to talk about the pickle factories and the pickles. He raised pickles, and they had big vats at McCoysburg next to the railroad track, and they also had a big vat in Pleasant Ridge next to the store. The store in Pleasant Ridge was on the north side of the railroad track and on the west side of the road where Talbert's is now. And then between it and the railroad track was the pickle barrel where they brought the pickles in. So Bud said that he had 1 acre the first year, and the second year he had 2 acres, and that they gave him $3 a hundred for the smaller pickles, and then $2 for the medium size.
100 pickles or 100 pounds?
100 pounds. And then $1 for those that were great big. So he didn't make a big killing, but he said the Robinsons that lived where Sandy Gershbach lives now, or next door there, they had a huge pickle patch, about 4 acres. So Bud would, after he'd get his pickles picked, well, he would go down and help Robinsons get theirs done as he took his in to sell at the Berg. So that was a way that he made his money to go to school. After he was through with the 8th grade at Marion, they didn't haul the kids to high school when he was a freshman. So he had to go to Hanging Grove to school. And they wouldn't come and pick him up because our house was just across the line in Marion Township. So he would have to walk from our place to Richard Potts, or where Richard Potts used to live, to catch the school bus, which is about, 3/4 of a mile, Potts's anyhow, and back every day. But he said his pickles supported him with clothing and boots and shoes and stuff to go to school on. So he was really glad that he was able to have some pickles. I guess every kid is always anxious to have some kind of job, and that was something that he helped make some money with. Then let's see. Now, my dad and Mom loved to play cards. And I know Mother played checkers and chess and dominoes with her parents all the time. And then after we moved to town, when I was little, we lived in town, they were members of the Oddfellows Lodge. And I never had a babysitter. I always went up there to those card parties and those dinner meetings, and they'd put a pillow down on the floor and a blanket, and I'd sleep maybe, And I was playing cards, I think, by the time I was in the first grade, was able to play euchre and played euchre. But my husband's family, parents, would not allow any cards in the house or no pictures of sailboats or water because they didn't want any of their kids to be in the Army or the Navy. So he never did learn how to play cards. So, and I have forgotten how to now too. I don't play cards anymore. On the farm we had, for our food, we'll cover that. A lot of wild things. We had huckleberries. They're different than blueberries. They're a ground cover. You had to really get down on the ground to pick huckleberries. And they were much, much smaller. They're blue, but much, much smaller. Maybe we'd pick a gallon a day on this patch that we had out on our 80, on this other farm that we lived on. We also had blackberries in the woods and some dewberries. And then one year my uncle brought some boysenberries from Chicago that he had picked, and we had never eaten or seen boysenberries, and that was really something. Those big berries were so delicious. So my mother had to order some plants for boysenberries, so we'd have some boysenberries on the farm. But as we started spraying for the weeds and everything in the crops, it's done away with the huckleberries and a lot of the raspberries and the berries in the woods. We always went around in the country along the fence row and hunted for asparagus growing. It used to grow wild along the roadside, so we didn't need to raise it in our garden. But now then, with the spraying, why, that's all gone and we have to plant it ourselves. We always had a big garden, and I know my grandparents always had a big garden, both of them. We had potatoes. One of the contracts we had, I've got a lot of old papers down here. So you want to look at the writing on that. They didn't have a typewriter, and all of these old papers are written from way back, and the writing is just really something to look at. So everybody come down and take a look at some of that writing on those papers. But anyway, one of them, Dad allowed the tenant to have 2 acres for potatoes for his family, but I'm sure they had more than that, a bigger garden than that, but 2 acres was allowed for the potatoes. They raised turnips and sweet potatoes and parsnips and cabbage and carrots that were all stored. Now then, on the big farm, they could put it down in the basement. Yeah, here. Oh, there was a half acre there for potatoes. That was for Ed Jenkins, Bud's dad. I'm going to have a half acre of potatoes for potatoes. Where's this? Oh yeah, that's the 80. That's where I moved during the Depression, in this little house. And that was an aerial view they had taken with the barn and the turkey sheds and everything. We did have some chickens at that farm. Yeah, the one shed. No, this one. This shed here. One Sunday morning, that was full of baby chickens, and we went out getting ready to go to church, and it was on fire. That burned all the chickens that year in that shed. That was really scary. We didn't have a phone, so we couldn't call the fire department. We didn't get a phone, I don't believe, until I was in college. And I don't know why. I guess because of the expense of getting it put in. We were quite a ways back off the road. You can see the road way on the other side. That house is quite a ways back from the road. So I can't imagine now how I'd ever get along without a phone, but we didn't get electricity put in there in that house. I believe I was probably in high school. We had a fire in the house one time. We had a kerosene lamp standing too close on the table, standing too close to the curtain. And I was busy studying, and that lamp got the curtain too hot, and it burned. And my mom grabbed it and pulled it outside, and we were able to keep the thing contained and really quick, and didn't do hardly any damage, but scared us all to death. So we were really a lot more cautious from there on. We also had other poultry. We didn't need a watchdog. We had guineas. And they let you know when anything comes around. Does everybody know what a guinea is? So, of course, we had the chickens, and then we sold eggs. We had friends come down from Chicago often and buy our eggs. Then there was a huckster, Morris Jacks, I believe his name was, that came around and with his huckster wagon, and if we didn't happen to be going into town, if we didn't need coffee that Saturday, why, we would sell our eggs to Morris. But if my dad was out of coffee, why, we'd go to town. Once a week we went to town if Dad needed coffee. We had the grandparents had milk cows and the horses, and she had the sheep that mowed the yards. And I have run into several older families that said, I can remember when we used to get sheep from your dad to mow our yards. And at one time there was even a fence around your place, and they must have brought some of those sheep in there to keep that clean down too. There's a girl on the farm. What does high school kids do on the farm besides ride tractors? And we didn't have tractors. One of my jobs was to pick up kindling on the way off the school bus up to the house, because oftentimes Dad would feed the calves or something out in front of the barn there. So if you throw out corn cobs or what have you, well, I could pick up some corn cobs on my way if I didn't have too many books to carry. My mother said I was rationing out the corn cobs, the kindling, a little bit too close, and I better walk back and get some more sometimes. I helped haul in the wood. On the weekends, we'd usually go out and into the woods and cut wood, and I had to help load wood into the back of the old trailer. We gardened and canned all the time. Pumped water. That was one of my jobs, to pump water for the cattle. Now over on the other farm, not that one, the picture, okay. We have a high windmill. So this is where Bud Jenkins lived, and gosh, they piped that water, and they didn't ever have to pump water because the wind usually kept the water for their cattle, and that was something that they had a long pipe. Oh, as we were talking about the school bus, Bud going to school, the school bus couldn't go over into Hanging Grove Township, so when they did get to the place, when he was a junior in high school, they did decide to take the kids into town to school. So they would drive through our woods. Maybe you can get that flat, man. They would drive through town, or through our woods. There's the windmill first. See how high that is? when the wheel finally dropped off of that, we thought Santa Claus had come in the middle of the winter, in the middle of the summer, because it really rolled a long ways. And Ed Byroads bought that wheel now, and it's going to be up in their yard. They're putting a new windmill up in their yard. Now, if I can you mark where that woods is?
Right,
Yeah, okay. The bus would come over on where the back road is.
Oh, it's right here.
Yeah. And through the woods. And on up to that main road that goes to McCoyster. Yeah, straight on through there. That's the end of a T road there around here, so they could just go right through that wood. Sometimes it was a little muddy. Sometimes they had to get out and open the gates if they had the cattle in the field. And but they seemed to survive. But that bus would not go over into Hanging Grove Township to pick Bud up on that other road. And in some of these papers that we found, 114 was then called the Bradford Rensselaer Highway. I found several references to the Bradford Road, and then to the Rensselaer Bradford Road, and then Bradford Rensselaer Highway. So that was 114 then. It was called. Let's see. Oh yes, my grandmother Jordan was so concerned about my behavior as a young child that they bought me enough yarn to make me a suit to keep me out of mischief. And they put a limit on that. I had to knit this in the summertime, which was terrible. It was so hot. And we didn't have air conditioning, but I had to have it done by the time I started to school. And I could wear it the first day of school. Can you imagine wearing a knitted wool suit to school the first day? Oh, I hated that thing. I don't think I ever wore it afterwards. But I had to go out to Grandma's every once in a while and show her how I was progressing on that suit and if I was having any problems. And if I had to tear some out, and she'd always tell me, well, now a good knitter never minds tearing stuff out. So anyway, I got through that. We used to have a lot of parties when we did get cars. We'd go around to homes, and the kids have their own card parties. And we'd play 3 Deep. That was a favorite game. High school kids then, I don't know. It was fun. We had a good time running around playing those games. Of course, Spin the Bottle was something else that was fun. Often on Saturday nights, they'd have barn dances, or square dances rather, in private homes. And I can remember going around in the neighborhood, a lot of them would roll up their carpets and move their furniture, and we'd have square dances in the homes. They had several out in this house, in the living room, I know, and there were 2 rooms of them there then. And so they just move everything out, and so we always, there was a dance somewhere, and there was always music. Somebody always brought something to play, so we always had plenty of music, and always a caller, somebody that was able to call. Okay. Let's see, there was something else I was thinking about. Oh. Then, as we'd go to grandmother's, and all of the cousins would come, and what a good time it was when all the kids were there. And it was one of our jobs to go nutting. She had hickory nuts, and walnuts on her farm. And on Jax's farm, there used to be hazelnuts before they cleared it away. Has anybody seen hazelnuts growing besides Bob? But they're wrapped up in such a tight husks. It's really something to get them peeled and everything, and then we'd roast them. And anyway, that was a big deal to do the hazelnuts and the hickory nuts and the walnuts. But now then, there's walnut trees around, but it seems like none of the nuts have good meat in them anymore. And I don't know why. Used to be so good then, and I have never been able to find a native walnut that is good anymore. We always had grapevine swings in the woods. That was a big deal, to go swing on these huge grapevine swings in the woods. The vines would get this big, and they would just support so many people, and it was really fun. And it was almost like a hammock. We could get 3 or 4 different kids in that seat and swing, and my grandmother kept one in her yard just on purpose for us and her grandkids to swing on. But then they finally, with the spraying and stuff, why, that has disappeared. Oh, is it? Okay. Oh, let's see, what else was I going to talk about? Ryan says it's about time. Oh, well, let me show you this first. This was something that I was really, everybody was surprised at all of the new laws that they have. This was my mother's application to get married. Look at all of the stuff you had to fill out.
I like this one here.
It isn't
Is she
quite.
imbecile, feeble-minded, idiotic, or insane? It says no. You're all right.
Ryan's going to tell about how he proceeded to get this Homestead Award, and you can see the big poster. And there's an aerial view of the farm that I'm talking about there. And let's see, let's put this down here first. Can you hold it down there? This is what he gave me for Christmas one year, and that told me that they had done all this research. They didn't have any of these papers here when they started on this. And so I was really surprised and appreciated it. Okay, we'll take our break now then, and I'll get...